So Eve is the first mother, based on Genesis 3:20 that we will quote in a minute. She was the first mother, and the Lord created her with all the necessary elements to be able to reproduce. Okay, in Genesis 3:20 it says, "Now the man named his wife Eve because she was a mother of all the living." For many years, scientists would not accept that Eve was a mother of all living. They just couldn't do it. They had this idea. Even I remember when my school days that they would talk about in the classrooms about these amoebas that were coming out of the water, although they can't explain where the amoebas came from. And then these amoebas got used to living on the earth and in the land and be able to breathe and so forth. And so they had a little video of all these amoebas crawling out. And some of them became women and some of them became men and so forth, And of course, there was a lot in between. In fact, they even mentioned that they probably became more of an ape. So as you know, a lot of people have said for many years that we all evolved from apes. So the theory of evolution is just that, it's a theory. So it's not like the law of gravity. It's like the law of gravity, whether you believe in it or not, it is what it is. Jump off the roof and say, I don't believe in gravity, you'll fall down anyway. And so it was that they were always trying to make evolution not just a theory but a law. And they've been struggling this for many years. And in my research regarding Eve, that we will get more into, it was through her and this first couple that we noticed that the theory of evolution was completely destroyed. But nobody is talking about it, just like Cynthia mentioned earlier. They don't want to admit they were wrong, but they were wrong. And science made a lot of fun of us as unintelligent, and we're backward people. We don't know what we're talking about. We got our heads stuck in an old book that is ancient. But they're beginning to realize that Adam and Eve existed. Isn't that a funny thing? In fact, here's what the science says today. All people descended from just two people, and a catastrophic event almost wiped all the species 100,000 years ago. Well, they got the last part wrong. They'll figure it out someday. Be patient with them. We believe as Christians that it all started about more like closer to 6,000. But 100,000, where did they come from? I don't know. In fact, I would say the scientists are very reckless with the dates. They just throw out numbers, kind of like some politicians we know. They just quote things and they don't even back it up with anything. I'll give you an example. Recently, I heard that there was this scientist that was really fussing about the fact that, everybody's so confused. They don't want to take the COVID shots, but these are safe. And we've been giving these kinds of shots for millions of years, he said. Here's a guy that's intelligent. Here's a guy who's a doctor and scientist. He says they've been given injections for millions of years. Now, I just stopped and froze and said, oh my God, this guy don't know what he's talking about. Of course, later on, he'll probably say something like, it was just a figure of speech, But they are, as I said, reckless with the way they quote things. And too many times, people have been misled by science. And this scientific study has prompted speculation that all modern humans could have, there's some begrudging, don't they? They don't want to say did, but it could have descended from a solitary pair And never mind the years, they just can't figure out these years. In fact, what is the difference between 100,000 and 200,000? To them, it's like nothing. And why they pick those numbers, they can't even say. So let's just ignore the dates and the numbers. And in fact, we need to look at the Bible as probably, in fact, I would have to say, more true than anything that man ever wrote. The basic math tells us that all humans share ancestors. And thanks to that genetic data, in the 21st century, scientists are discovering that we all descended from one mother. And this is where we take the story back to Eve. So Eve was the first mom. She was the first mother. And in fact, she is our, I don't know if we can call her our first mother, but she's at least a first great-grandmother or whatever that was for so many generations. And this is what the Bibles have been saying all along. It's not anything new to us as believers. The genetic barcodes, I won't stick too much with the science, but I thought we should build it up because when it blows up in their faces, I want to make sure everybody knows. Genetic barcodes of 5 million animals and from different species were surveyed. Now, bear in mind, they don't mention people because they think that people are animals. And we'll disprove that in a minute too. Research prompted speculation humans and animals sprang from a single pair, but again, they call humans animals. We evolved just like the animals, So they're saying that we all came from a single pair. In fact, we don't even talk about that, do we? There was a pair of chickens that started off, and so in fact, one of the things that they joke about is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Clearly, it was a chicken out all along, and we mentioned that before. In fact, a pair of dogs maybe, or apes, or whatever. But we were not animals ever, and we were before the animals. And so, but everybody had a pair from the very beginning. In fact, I would dare say that I had to admit that a lot of believers, and maybe me in the very beginning, thought that God created a bunch of animals at one time, and then the God brought them to Adam to name them and so forth. That's not the case. It was a pair. And so they say that this may have happened after a catastrophic event after the last age. Why do they keep throwing that in there? I'll tell you why. And that is because they believe that it was a catastrophic event that killed off the dinosaurs. And they figure if the dinosaurs were around the same time as mankind, they would have probably eaten us all up. So that couldn't have happened, they said. But of course, we've seen a lot of evidence that footprints of man and dinosaurs have been found close together. But I won't get into that because this is not what that's about. But I just want to point out they've been wrong about a lot of stuff. And it concludes that the study has been misunderstood by some religious parties. You see what they're saying? Who interpret it as challenging evolutionary theory, which has been denied by the authors. In other words, they're saying we still believe in evolution, even though it was a pair of people that started the whole thing off. How can you say that? You see? Even their own science blows up in their face, but they're stubborn about it. They still say evolutionary theory was right. Nope, it's wrong. It was a lie, and it always will be a lie. And what it is that mankind, I believe, has tried to explain everything around them, but excluding God. That's what they're doing. And excluding the Word of God. But you know what? We as people of God, of the Lord, are not swayed by that. So here they are being stubborn again. We evolved from apes, we this and that, even though it was a pair of everything. And we are not animals either. So the myth that Adam and Eve were the first man and woman, they go on to say, on earth may have been proved true, as all humans are descendants of a single couple, scientists say. See, it keeps contradicting themselves, and these are all scientists arguing among themselves. Scientists have said that we sprang from a solitary pair of adults, again 100 to 200,000 years ago. And this is another scientist that was a lady, Catherine Clementine. But where does evolution come into all of this? And I promise you, we will get eventually back to Eve. But as I was looking up Eve, I wanted to see what science had to say about her, There was a couple of scientists named Stockel and Thaler. They headed this study and concluded that 90% of all animal species alive today come from parents that all began giving birth at roughly the same time. Then, less than 250,000 years ago, I don't know where they come up with these numbers, throwing into doubt the patterns of human evolution. Here's other scientists arguing with each other. One says, we still believe in evolution, and don't misinterpret this. You religious people are wrong. And here's other scientists, and these guys are probably more famous than the other bunch, and they're saying, maybe we were wrong about this stuff. Maybe Eve was the mother of all creation after all. And they don't take that very lightly, so they're kind of, it's like thinking, and hopefully they're bright enough and smart enough to say, if we were wrong about this, I wonder what else we were wrong about. You know what I mean? And just because they figured out some things, in other words, I think they ought to start back with a Big Bang. The Big Bang says there was a big ball of whatever, and it exploded, and all kinds of good stuff came out of it. And all these planets that were perfectly shaped and formed with rivers and trees and everything. I have heard fairy tales that were more believable than that, and I got to say, I think, I dare say this, Stan and I are probably more from the scientific realm. I have a lot of science in my background, but I've always laughed at this thing, They never did get this right. So the answer is yes, all people and animals came from two people. But we didn't come from animals. No apes, no nothing like that. And here's another thing that they use against us as believers. Who was Cain's wife, right? But I know that Stan and I don't hide from these questions. In fact, we address them full steam ahead, and eventually they get blown out of the water. Genesis 4 verse 17 says, Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And Cain built a city and named the city Enoch after the name of his son. This has been another reason that agnostics, or people that doubt the Bible, don't really believe the Bible is true. And these same people are probably thinking, you know what, we were wrong about Adam and Eve, but we're not wrong about this one. Where did they come from? And you know what other Christians say? I've even asked other Christians, where do you think Cain's wife came from? And they say, God created other people besides Adam and Eve. So they're all wrong. Even the Christians are all wrong. Because even the science, and including the Bible, they're in agreement. They came from two people. Okay? It was just two people. And the reason why this is a confusion And nobody has even quoted this verse, so I need to quote it. In Genesis 5:4, the days of Adam after his father Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Okay? He had other children. And note that Genesis is not in perfect chronological order. I think we brought that up before. And I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about. So the answer to that question is Cain's wife was either a sister or a niece. I don't know, maybe you want to call her a cousin if you want, but they were related, okay? But even science will tell you that the DNA was uniquely different in the very beginning. So you can't marry your sister now, or your cousin or whatever, your second cousin, because the DNA is not very different anymore. It's with people that you're related to, okay? And but in the end, we're all related anyway, you know. It's just not. The question is, how related are we, you know? And so the DNA was very different. So even scientists came up with that idea that the first couple's DNA was completely different. So naturally, the children they had different DNA too. So they could intermarry. I mean, what choices do they have? You know, it's not like somebody else. They could intermarry and the DNA would not get mixed up. You know, they wouldn't have people that were probably mentally ill or whatever. In fact, I don't know if you heard about this in history, but the kings and queens of way back in the Middle Ages, they intermarried with their children. They intermarried, and as a consequence, and they did that because they wanted to keep the bloodline, you know, the same. But they had some children that were, oh my God, they were not right. They were all messed up. You know, they were very deformed. So that was a very bad idea. And again, that's the DNA. It was very much the same, unlike the very beginning. But I mentioned that just because they didn't mention about the birth of all these children in the very beginning, it just proves that it wasn't all chronological, you know. Genesis 1:26 says, then God said, let us make mankind in our own image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth. So I underline this because I'm going to get back to this in verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. You see? So that means that none of us are complete. Some of, you know, the females have a part of God that is very different from what the males have from God. And only when they are a couple are they complete, you see. And but it goes on to say that God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill all the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So as you know, they created mankind. See, so don't be misled when God says man or mankind, he's talking about people. Okay, that's what they call people. But he's specifically saying males or females. He will say that. He will come out right with saying it. So just remember, God created us uh, pretty close to the same time. And he created us with characteristics of God. But, all of us share part of God, but not completely. So notice that was chapter 1, but look at chapter 2. And I'm just bringing this up so because this disproves people saying that there's the timeline was all messed up, with the birth of all these daughters and sons. Here's Genesis 2. Adam was not found a helper suitable for him, so the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon man, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh of that place. And the Lord God fashioned it into a woman, the rib which he had taken from the man, and brought her to the man. And then the man said, at last, this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she will be called woman because she was taken out of a man. So, this is what we're led to. Chapter 1 says they were already created. Chapter 2, he's still creating them, So, Moses, we believe he wrote this, he's just telling the story the best way he can. And remember, and in fact, we just mentioned it a while ago in the Bible study, that maybe we haven't mentioned that there's some things that Moses didn't always get it all completely at the right times and so forth, because he got a second hand. I mean, he certainly wasn't there when Adam and Eve were born, so he's probably getting it directly from God, just like he got the Ten Commandments. So let's not blame, not be too hard on Moses. He did the best he could with what he had. So it comes back to Eve's sin and punishment. Okay. So Eve was not a perfect person either. You know what? We have free will, and free will in the wrong hands is a terrible thing. How many times have you done something that you regret later on? I know I have, and I look back and say, you know what? I wish I didn't have free will. I wish God would just take over and say, stop that. You're not going to do that. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 14 and 15, it says, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if, and here's the big if, they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. Self-control of what? The free will business, you see. You got to control yourself. And somebody once has asked me, and asked out loud as well, why do we even have free will? To me, it's common sense. How can God reward you or punish you if you had no free will? If you couldn't help yourself. You were just like some sort of robot or a zombie or whatever works, in that analogy. What if you were only doing because God was controlling? So how can he punish you if you got it wrong? And therefore he gives yourself free will, but he only warns you, you got to use self-control. Because how you use your free will will determine whether I will bless you or punish you. Okay? So whether you like to hear it this way or not, Adam was not deceived. The woman was deceived and became a transgressor, but no, we're not letting Adam off the hook. We will get back to him again. Genesis 3:16, to the woman he said, and this is God talking, I will greatly multiply your sorrow on your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. And here's the other punishment. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. So it stands to, what this is saying is that part of her punishment is that she's not equal to him, at least not in this world. Maybe the next is a different story. But God kind of explained things to Adam. You know, he got punished because he didn't do his part. Okay, they just had two different kinds of sin. So her sin was she allowed herself to be deceived, and she listened to the devil more than God. And so the Bible clearly states a man is the head of the house, not because he's bigger, not because he's smarter or superior in some way. He is in that position because Eve was being punished for her sin. So don't blame the man. If you don't like that, you know, take it up with God. God is who he is. And we all carry the consequences of Adam and Eve in our own genes. We really do. We kind of mess up the way that Adam does, and women mess up the way that Eve does, you know. She still has the tendency to tell the man to do some things that he shouldn't be doing. And hopefully you have a godly wife, so that won't happen. 1 Corinthians 11:3 says, "But I want you to understand that the head of every man is the Messiah, and the head of the wife is her husband, and the head of the Messiah is God." See, he doesn't just mention it in one place, but in many different places he's mentioning there that because of what happened with Adam and Eve in the very beginning, the first mother and the first father, there are consequences of that we cannot undo. It's become more of a rank, though. It's not like you're my slave, you know, and I'm your master. It doesn't mean that. It's more of a rank, okay? A chain of command. But you know what? It also goes, you know, it started off as a punishment, but maybe not so much now. You know, we as Christians and believers, you know, we see it in the Bible, and this is what God says. Don't get angry with your husband, and don't abuse that. You know, don't abuse that rank that you have as a husband, because we are told, I believe it's in Timothy, that we should deal with our wives, listen to our wives with understanding. And it's hard, you know, because we don't think like women. I'm sorry. We really don't. So you got to explain it to us a little bit better, I guess. And so there is sin and punishment for both. And so we want to reiterate, Eve's sin was that she allowed the serpent to deceive her, and she enticed Adam to eat it too. And this is why her punishment was painful at childbirth. And the second punishment was the man would rule over her. I guess it stands to reason that it was not the intention. Now, society today doesn't really agree with that. Are you going to listen to society or to the God and his word? That's what it boils down to. This was not because he was smarter again, but because of the first sin in the Garden of Eden. That's what it's all about. Now, Adam's sin was he listens to his wife instead of God. See? And this doesn't mean you should never listen to your wife. It just means that if it comes between your decision to hear God and listen to God and her, you have to choose God. Even if she gets mad at you, okay? And you might say, well, I don't see how a godly wife would do that, you know. But the truth is, we're not really talking about godly wives necessarily. We're talking about all wives, you know. This is going on today, and I think Cynthia addressed this very well before, that the role of man, the husband, has been diminished over time. He's taken second place, and he's frowned upon. And so we bring feminism into the home, and feminism, for the most part, is not biblical. It is not godly at all. It's very worldly. Genesis 3 verse 6 says, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took some of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Now I know I'm reiterating here, but I underline this part because it's not like he came up to her and gave her, hey, eat this. He was there with her at the same time. He got this, and just between me and you, and hope God is not listening, I think the man should have been punished more. I really do. And you know why? Because he knew better. He was told the truth. He was told, get away from that. So his sin, and yes, in a way, I would say he was maybe got off the hook a little bit more, but he was with her. He saw what she was doing. But on the other hand, there's two sides to every coin, right? And I've had a lot of discussions about things like that with other people that are agnostics or probably weak Christians, and they say, well, why didn't he just take over and say, no, you're wrong, I'm the man here, and I'm telling you, stay away from that. He wasn't the man of the house yet. Okay, that came later. He wasn't the one that would control things, and she wasn't either. So that's the other thing there. But nevertheless, he should have listened to the Lord more than her, because the reality is he knew better. And in verse 17 it says, then to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife. See there again, that's his sin. He listened to the voice of his wife. And God already told him what to do, and he messed up. And you have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. With hard labor you shall eat from it all the days of your life. So our struggle in working is difficult in many ways, whether it's physical or mental or emotional or whatever. But it's tough. But you know what? A lot of wives work today too. You know, we've had households that have two parents at work, you know, so it's tough. We had that same situation until we had our last son there, our last child. And I gotta say that it took a lot of adjustment to do, but I tell you, I wish we'd have done that from the very beginning, because the truth of the matter is that God provided anyway, and provided much better than he did with two of us working, you know. But circumstances that were beyond our control forced us to make that decision. But it's all good. You know, God is in control, and it all worked out for the best. So Adam's sin is he listened to his wife and not to God. That's what that's about. We will realize that also his punishment is that life is not going to be easy for you anymore. You got to go out there and hunt. You got to go out there and plant and build and sweat. And so in essence, we are incomplete. We're not the same. Women have those characteristics of the mothering and nurturing being and being comforting. Uh, and when I say that, when I read that, and I was remembering way back when my youngest son, uh, when something would happen to him and he'd be crying, he would run up to mom and tell her, this is what happened, and then she would be very mothering and nurturing, and she would say, oh, what happened? Oh no, poor thing, and let me kiss it, make it better, things like that. But I'm not mom. So when he came up to me, because she wasn't around at the moment and something happened, and he was crying and said, oh, this happened to me. And I'd be staring at him and say, okay, it'll go in a minute. And he says, no, that's not what you say. You say, poor dude, you should have, he says, I'm so sorry for you. Let me kiss and make it better. It doesn't come natural, In fact, when I got a little cut or something, I came up to my dad one time. He says, throw some mud on it. It'll be better. That's not what mom would do, But just remember, though, and I'm not saying that to kind of diminish our need as men to be more caring and nurturing. But I just want you to know it doesn't come natural as it does for women. Isaiah 66:13 reminds us that God has both features of men and women. So remember, from the very beginning, he made man and women after his image. God says, as one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you. See, and I brought that in this analogy, which happens to be true, that we don't necessarily comfort the same way. And maybe some do and some don't. I don't know, but it isn't natural. We got to articulate it in some way. But God is telling us here, he will comfort us the same way as your mom would. So remember now, God is not a man, nor is he a woman, but he's got both characteristics because he put it in us. So Eve was who she was. And you know what? I kind of dare think that when Cain sinned, and by killing his brother, she not only mourned for his brother, but she mourned for Cain as well. Abel was in the ground, and I'm sure she shed a lot of tears for him, but she also shed a lot of tears for her son, who ran away because he wanted to hide. But that's what mothers do. I imagine that Adam must have been very angry with him. How dare him do this, and that sort of thing, But who knows? But God will comfort us in our time of need. And so let's look at the Messiah himself. He also is comforting. In John 11, verse 33, I want to show you here, and we're getting close to the end, by the way. I want to show you here that Jesus, who we say was God in the flesh, also had the same feminine and masculine characteristics. So here he is, and the groundwork here is Lazarus has died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was also deeply moved and spirited and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And right away Jesus wept. Okay. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. And Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But look at how Martha and the sister Mary reacted. You would think, oh, thank God the Messiah is here, he's going to raise him. No, they care too much about the Lord. They said, by this time there is a bad odor. And some other versions say he stinks. There's a bad odor for he's been in there for 4 days. Why did he say 4 days? Okay. Does that make any difference? I'll tell you in a minute. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? But they don't get it. They don't know what he's talking about. They think he's talking about the resurrection. Jesus wept openly, which is odd for a man to show in an outward display of emotion. And he was deeply moved. We don't know what that meant. But I would say that it was some physical way of emotions. Okay? But Jesus displayed these emotions without thought because, like God the Father, he had both qualities of man and women. And we also see that the man that that thought he wept because he loved Lazarus so much, they got it wrong too. Bear in mind, getting back to that 4-day business, we studied this in theology classes, and we had to go back. This is the reason we have to go back to the Jewish customs and origin of the Hebrew language and so forth. The Jews don't accept that one is dead until they have been dead for 3 days. If they're not moving after 3 days, you may as well bury him or something. But even then, they're not positive. So they put you in a tomb or either in a tomb that you can walk off in case you have to, or in a box that is made of wood so that maybe it's easier to get out of, I don't know. Or maybe you'll just become part of the earth again. But again, 3 days, you see? So if you go back to read the original story, before this, it says they told him, oh, Lazarus is very sick at this time. And he said, oh, okay. So he basically says, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, I'll be there in 2 days. Instead of saying I'll be right over, no, I'm going to wait a couple of days. Why? Because he wanted to make sure it was more than 3 days. So if the Jews that were there as witnesses saw him resurrect him in 3 days, they would have said, he wasn't dead. He was not officially by our customs dead. But after 4 days, yep, he was not just dead, he was very dead. So God, through Jesus, was proving his power over death. In fact, they got it wrong when they said, see how he loved him. Yeah, he loved Lazarus, but that's not why he was crying. Jesus was not grieving for Lazarus because he knew he was going to be resurrected. And if you read more of the story, Martha and Mary didn't get it either. They said, well, yes, we know he's going to be resurrected with us in the future. No, he's going to resurrect right now. Why was Jesus doing that? He was not showing off. He was trying to show us. Number one, he had both feminine and masculine characteristics. Number two, he also had power over death. In fact, he proved it again when he was resurrected because he was showing that death could not keep him in the tomb. And he said to us, we too will be resurrected like him. Now, if you told me that, I wouldn't believe it. But when Jesus tells me that, I believe it wholeheartedly. And he proved it, okay? This is what he was doing. He was trying to make a point. He was trying to show people about the characteristics of Adam and Eve, but he was also trying to show that death had no power over him. And he wept for Mary and Martha, who were put through this very bad ordeal, this terrible ordeal. And he knew he was putting them through that. So when he said, I'll show up a couple of days later when it's 4 days, he didn't mention that, but that's what it amounted to. But he knew it was going to hurt them for that. And they were going to mourn for him for 3 days. And he hated to put them through that because Lazarus was good. He was going to go and he was going to be okay. And they needed not to worry about them. But he let them go through that because he had to. So in conclusion, Eve had no example to follow. She was the one and only woman. Kind of sort of reminds me of my mom because her mother passed away when she was a girl. Maybe not a little girl, she was an adolescent, and boy, she got a lot of things wrong that I won't get into. But I don't blame Mom. You know, she didn't have any mother to show her how to be a mother, and neither did Eve. And so I saw that firsthand, what it means like when you don't have an example to follow. And we all carry the sin of Adam and Eve until our Savior covers that sin with grace. So we have the sin of Adam among us as men and the sin of Eve as women until we get it right. We don't anymore. That's the good news. Because we finally got it right. We accepted Christ. We've been baptized. We are covered by the grace of the Lord. And we are able to become sons and daughters of God. And we are also promised that one day we will be resurrected just like Adam and Eve will. Wouldn't it be a special thing and cool thing to see Adam and Eve for the first time? I mean, I would really be excited to see my parents again and my sisters that passed away. But wouldn't it be something special to see Adam and Eve, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and most especially Yeshua, our Lord and Savior, to see him again. Well, we never saw him before, but to see him in the flesh. And we live in an age where mothers and fathers' role in the family has been diminished by the world. I have heard of two men marrying and raising a child on their own. They adopted a child. What kind of home is that going to be like? Or two women adopting a child. And yes, the role of men has been diminished. And I dare say the role of men and women has been diminished over time. Because too many people listen to the things of this life, the people of this world. And we should not do that. Unfortunately, it happens. I'll close with a word from the Lord in Proverbs 31. This is, of course, from Solomon, the wisest king, in fact, the wisest man that ever lived. 31 verses 26 to 29. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. She finds something to do, doesn't she? Her children arise and call her blessed, and her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. So during Mother's Day, some of us don't have our mothers here anymore, but we have a mother among us, and that's the person we honor. So not everybody, not every family has a godly mother in the household. And I feel sorry for them. And don't think it comes natural for some. I have heard some women that will kill their child not only in a clinic by aborting them, but they've also given them away. They've killed them. All kinds of crazy things. But not all women are like that. Just like not all men are the same. We indeed should be thankful that we have a wife and a mother that's among us that works with wisdom. We should pray for the moms in our family, whether you have a mom or not. But you certainly have a lot of us have a mom in the house. So pray for the moms that we know, and remind them that she came from Eve, and Eve was not perfect either. She was a flawed creature just like the rest of us. But God had forgiven that, and God has covered her with grace. And Solomon says that we should all praise her. And so we are thankful for the mothers that we have in our life, because they're few and far between these days.